Part 1. The Birth of a Legend. 100 BCE to 85 BCE. The year is 100 BCE, Rome. A city teetering between tradition and transformation, pulses with political unrest. The Roman Republic, once held together by a delicate balance of laws, customs, and noble ambition, is now a battleground of ideological warfare. The streets echo with the footsteps of soldiers returning from distant campaigns, while in the Senate voices rise in furious debate. It is into this charged atmosphere that Gaius Julius Caesar is born, destined to leave an indelible mark on history. Caesar's family, the Iuli, traces its lineage back to the mythical Trojan Prince Aeneas, and through him to Venus, the goddess of love. This noble heritage placed them among the patrician class, Rome's oldest aristocracy, but the Iuli had fallen on comparatively modest times. Though respected, they did not wield the financial or political clout of the Republic's most influential families. Caesar's father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, held the position of praetor and governed the province of Asia. His mother, Aurelia Cata, came from a more politically connected family and would prove to be a guiding force in young Julius's life from an early age. Caesar was immersed in the traditions and expectations of Rome's elite. He was educated in Greek and Latin, rhetoric, philosophy, and Roman law. He studied the great works of Homer and the oratory of Cicero. His natural brilliance was evident to those around him. But what set Caesar apart was not merely his intellect, it was his extraordinary drive, his ability to perceive the shifting currents of power, and his unshakable belief in his destiny. Part 2. The Rise Amidst Chaos, 85 BCE, 275 BCE. The death of Caesar's father, when Julius was just 16, catapulted him prematurely into adulthood. As the head of his household, Caesar was thrust into the complex world of Roman politics. Around this time, Rome was plunged into chaos by the conflict between the populist general Gaius Marius, Caesar's uncle by Marigend, the conservative, aristocrat Lucius Cornelius Sulla. The bloody power struggle culminated in Sulla's rise to dictatorship. Caesar, by virtue of his connection to Marius and his marriage to Cornelia, the daughter of one of Marius's allies, found himself on the wrong side of the new regime. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia. When Caesar refused, Sulla stripped him of his inheritance and priesthood. Caesar went into hiding, constantly moving to evade capture. Friends interceded on his behalf, and eventually Sulla relented, purportedly saying, "In this Caesar there are many With his life spared but his position in ruins, Caesar left Rome to begin a military career in Asia Minor. There, he distinguished himself in campaigns against local tribes and in the siege of Mytilene. During this time, he was awarded the civic crown, one of Rome's highest military honors, for saving the life of a fellow soldier. These experiences honed his leadership skills and solidified his reputation as a brave and capable commander. Part 3. Caesar's military career begins. 75 BCE to 60 BCE. In 75 BCE, while en route to Rhodes to study oratory, Caesar was kidnapped by Cilician pirates. Far from pleading for his life, Caesar treated his captors with contempt. He insisted they raise his ransom, as he believed he was worth more. He mingled with them as an equal, joking that he would one day return to crucify them. True to his word, after his release, he raised a small fleet, captured the pirates, and had them executed. This bold episode was a glimpse into Caesar's complex character, charming and ruthless, audacious and calculating. Upon his return to Rome, Caesar began to rise through the ranks of Roman politics. He was elected quaestor in 69 BCE, serving in Hispania. The death of his wife Cornelia that same year marked a personal loss, but he continued to ascend politically. He remarried to Pompeia, a granddaughter of Sulla, further cementing his social standing. As aedile in 65 BCE, he gained public favor by sponsoring lavish games and spectacles, incurring massive personal debts to do so. This pattern of courting the masses at great personal expense would define much of Caesar's political life. In 63 BCE, he was elected Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman state religion, thanks to a masterful campaign. His election was unexpected, as he was the youngest candidate and not the frontrunner. The victory underscored his growing influence and the effectiveness of his populist appeal. He moved into the official residence on the Via Sacra, a powerful symbol of his new prestige. Rome at this time was in constant turmoil. The Catiline conspiracy, a failed coup attempt by a disgruntled aristocrat, further exposed the fragility of the Republic. Caesar, serving as praetor, walked a fine line between condemning the conspirators and appealing to popular sentiment. His speeches revealed a nuanced understanding of Roman law and public opinion. In 61 BCE, Caesar was appointed governor of Hispania Ulteria, where he swiftly proved his administrative and military prowess. He conquered local tribes, relieved debts, and returned to Rome hailed as a military hero. But more importantly, he gained the wealth he desperately needed to clear his debts and fund his future ambitions. Part 4. The First Triumvirate and the Path to Power 60 BCE to 58 BCE. By 60 BCE, Caesar had his sights set on the consulship, the highest office in the Republic. To secure it, he formed a strategic alliance with two of Rome's most powerful men, Pompey the Great, a celebrated general whose veterans were being denied land, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. Their informal coalition, known to history as the First Triumvirate, was a political masterstroke. Each man brought something essential: Caesar his popular support and political skill, Pompey his military might, and Crassus his vast wealth. With their backing, Caesar was elected consul in 59 BCE. Once in power, he pushed through legislation that benefited both his allies and the Roman populace. He passed agrarian reforms to distribute land to Pompey's soldiers, and favorable tax laws for Crassus's clients. These actions endeared him to the masses, but infuriated the Senate. His methods, often bypassing traditional procedures, were seen as dangerous precedents. When his term ended, Caesar sought to shield himself from prosecution by securing a military command. He was granted the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul. What followed would become one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in history. The Gallic Wars. Here, the stage was set. Julius Caesar had risen from a precarious childhood through sheer will, charisma, and strategic brilliance. Now, he stood on the brink of a conquest that would not only bring him unimaginable glory, but also threaten the very fabric of the Roman Republic. And so began the next phase of Caesar's life, one that would take him into the heart of Gaul, across the Rubicon, and ultimately into the halls of power, with the fate of Rome hanging in the balance. Part 5. The Gallic Wars. Triumph and Transformation. 58 BCE to 50 BCE. As Caesar took command of the provinces of Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul, as well as Illyricum, he inherited a politically volatile region fraught with tribal unrest and the looming threat of invasion. The Gallic tribes, diverse in language, culture, and allegiance, were far from a unified entity. Yet Caesar, ever the visionary, saw not just the challenge of governing Gaul but the opportunity to forge his legacy in the blood and soil of conquest. In 58 BCE, the first major conflict arose when the Helvetiae, a Celtic tribe from modern-day Switzerland, attempted a mass migration through Roman territory. The sheer scale of the migration, over 300,000 people, alarmed both Roman citizens and allied Gallic tribes. Caesar, seizing the moment, portrayed the Helvetia as a threat to Roman security. Marching north with his legions, he intercepted them at the Battle of Abrupt. The confrontation was brutal, and despite being outnumbered, Caesar's tactical brilliance and his legions' discipline secured a decisive victory. The Helvetii were forced to return to their homeland, and Caesar's reputation as a commander was solidified. Following this success, Caesar turned his attention to the Germanic king Ariovistus, who had crossed the Rhine and established dominance over several Gallic tribes. The threat of Germanic expansion into Gaul provided Caesar with further justification to campaign deeper into the region. In a swift and decisive encounter near the Vosges Mountains, Caesar defeated Ariovistus, driving his forces back across the Rhine. This campaign not only neutralized a dangerous enemy, but also demonstrated Rome's military supremacy over the following years. Caesar's campaigns expanded across the Gallic territories. He employed a combination of military might, political manipulation, and strategic alliances to bring Gallic tribes under Roman control. Yet the conquest of Gaul was far from a straightforward affair. Rebellions erupted constantly, fueled by resentment, fear, and a desperate desire to preserve cultural identity. One of the most significant uprisings came in 52 BCE, led by Vercingetorix, a charismatic chieftain of the Arverni tribe. Uniting numerous Gallic tribes, Vercingetorix mounted the most formidable resistance Caesar had yet faced. His leadership galvanized Gaul in a way no other had accomplished. The revolt culminated in the Siege of Alesia, a masterclass in Roman engineering and endurance. Caesar, facing both the besieged forces within the city and a massive Gallic relief army outside, constructed two concentric rings of fortifications, one facing inward and the other outward. The siege tested the limits of Caesar's leadership and his army's resilience. Food shortages, constant attacks, and the sheer stress of maintaining dual lines of defense placed immense strain on the Roman forces. Yet Caesar's strategic foresight and his ability to inspire unwavering loyalty in his men ultimately triumphed. The Gallic relief army was defeated, and Vercingetorix, recognizing the inevitability of his defeat, surrendered to Caesar in a dramatic scene that would become legend with the fall of Alesia. Organized Gallic resistance was effectively crushed. Though sporadic rebellions would continue, Caesar's grip on the region was secure. His conquest of Gaul added vast territory to the Roman Republic and brought untold wealth in the form of spoils, slaves, and tribute. But perhaps more importantly, it gave Caesar a loyal and battle-hardened army, one that had fought and bled with him for nearly a decade back in Rome. However, his growing power and popularity unsettled the Senate. While the people hailed Caesar as a hero, many senators, especially those loyal to the Optimates, viewed him as a looming threat to the Republic. The first triumvirate had already begun to unravel. Crassus, seeking military glory, had died disastrously in Parthia in 53 BCE, and Pompey, once Caesar's closest ally and son-in-law, began to drift toward the senatorial elite. Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, were more than mere reports. They were political tools, carefully crafted to shape public perception. Written in the third person, they portrayed Caesar as a benevolent conqueror, a defender of Roman interests, and a man of reason amidst barbarism. They became widely read in Rome and further boosted his standing among the citizenry. Yet, while Caesar's star rose, the political skies darkened. The Senate demanded that Caesar relinquish his command and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution for his previous actions in office. To comply would mean humiliation, exile, or worse. To defy them would mean civil war. Thus, as Caesar stood at the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, he was faced with a fateful decision. The law was clear. No general could lead an army across the Rubicon into Italy. To do so would be to declare war on the Republic itself. But Caesar, ever aware of the stakes, uttered the immortal words, "Alea iactais to the Dias cast," and crossed the Rubicon with his legion. The Gallic Wars had transformed Julius Caesar. No longer just a politician or general, he had become a force of history, a man who wielded the might of Rome not merely as a tool of state, but as an extension of his will. The Republic would never be the same again, and now the path led inexorably to Rome, to civil war, and to Caesar's ultimate confrontation with fate. Part 6. Crossing the Rubicon. The War for Rome, 49 BCE to 45 BCE. The crossing of the Rubicon in January 49 BCE was not merely a tactical maneuver, it was a point of no return. Julius Caesar, with one legion, had openly defied the Senate's command and set the Roman Republic on a coursed war. With the words "Alea iacta est," he initiated a conflict that would shake Rome to its foundations. At the heart of this decision was a bitter and complex political rivalry. Caesar's immense success in Gaul had earned him the love of the Roman populace and the unwavering loyalty of his legions. Yet, in the eyes of the Senate, and particularly of Pompey the Great, his former ally and now rival, Caesar's growing influence posed a direct threat to the balance of power in the Republic. Pompey, once the hero of the East and a brilliant general, in his own right, had aligned himself with the optimist conservative faction of the Senate. He had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Caesar and Crassus in the first triumvirate. But with Crassus dead and Caesar's term as proconsul ending, the alliance had unraveled. Pompey, perhaps underestimating Caesar's boldness, allowed the Senate to issue an ultimatum: disband your army and return to Rome to stand trial. Caesar's response was simple. He would not submit to the authority of a Senate that had long sought to strip him of his dignity, his power, and his life. As Caesar marched south into Italy, panic spread among the senatorial elite. Lacking sufficient military support, Pompey and many senators fled Rome and retreated to Brundisium, aiming to regroup in Greece. Caesar, unopposed in Italy, entered the capital not as a conqueror, but as a restorer of order. He moved swiftly, seizing the state treasury, stabilizing grain supplies, and ensuring the continuity of governance. Yet his eyes were fixed on Pompey. The war was far from over. The initial months of the civil war saw Caesar consolidating control. In the west, he subdued Pompeian forces in Spain with a speed and decisiveness that shocked his enemies. "I am going to Spain to fight an army without a general," he reportedly said, "and I shall return to fight a general without an army." In a matter of months, Spain was his, but it was in the east, where Pompey had rallied his forces in Greece, that the true test awaited. In 48 BCE, Caesar crossed the Adriatic with a limited force, lacking ships and supplies. The risk was immense. Pompey commanded a vastly superior army, supported by the eastern provinces and the Roman aristocracy. The two forces finally clashed in the summer of that year at the Battle of Dyrrhachium. For the first time in years, Caesar tasted the bitterness of defeat. His forces were routed, his lines broken. Yet, remarkably, Pompey failed to press the advantage. He did not pursue the retreating Caesarians, a decision that would haunt him. Caesar, regrouping quickly, retreated inland and prepared for a second confrontation. At Pharsalus in central Greece, the decisive battle of the civil war unfolded. Caesar, heavily outnumbered, gave his men a stirring address, reminding them of their shared struggles in Gaul, their victories, and their cause. Pompey, confident in his advantage, expected an easy triumph, but Caesar's genius was never more evident than at Pharsalus. Using unconventional tactics and exploiting the overconfidence of his enemy, he turned what should have been a devastating defeat into a brilliant victory. Pompey's lines crumbled. His cavalry was routed, his infantry encircled. As the sun set over the blood-soaked plains, Caesar stood victorious. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping to find sanctuary with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. But the political tides of the ancient world were unforgiving. Seeing an opportunity to curry favor with Caesar, Ptolemy's ministers had Pompey assassinated. Upon arrival, his severed head was presented to Caesar, who, far from rejoicing, is said to have wept at the sight. Pompey had once been his friend, his partner in rule, and a man of great dignity. His end, cowardly and treacherous, was unworthy of such a figure. Caesar followed Pompey to Egypt and quickly became embroiled in its internal struggles. The kingdom was in chaos, torn between Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra VII. Caesar, ever the opportunist, aligned himself with Cleopatra. Their union, political, strategic, and romantic, would produce a child, Caesarion, and shape the future of both Rome and Egypt. Together, they defeated Ptolemy's forces, securing Cleopatra's throne. But Caesar's work was far from done. The Pompeian resistance lived on, especially in the provinces of North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. In 47 BCE, Caesar fought a swift campaign in Asia Minor against Pharnacus II of Pontus, who had exploited Rome's civil strife to expand his power. The campaign was so swift and decisive that Caesar famously declared, "Veni, vidi, vici, I came, I saw, I conquered." In 46 BCE, Caesar turned to North Africa, where the remnants of the senatorial faction had regrouped under Cato the Younger and Metella Scipio. The campaign culminated in the Battle of Thapsus. Once again, Caesar's legions triumphed. The defeat was so crushing that Cato, a man of unbending principle, chose suicide over submitting to Caesar's rule. The last flickers of resistance were extinguished in 45 BCE at the Battle of Munda in Hispania, where Caesar faced the sons of Pompey. The battle was brutal and hard fought, but Caesar emerged victorious. With Munda, the civil war was over. Caesar was the undisputed master of Rome. He returned to the capital not merely as a general, but as a symbol of transformation. The Republic, long teetering on the edge of collapse, was now held together by the will of a single man. The Senate, though still in place, had become a shadow of its former self, and the Roman people, weary of war and chaos, welcomed Caesar as their deliverer. Yet even in victory, shadows lingered. Caesar now held power unlike any Roman before him. The triumphs, the titles, the honors heaped upon him by a compliant Senate only deepened the question that haunted every Roman mind. Was the Republic dead? And if so, what would rise in its place? Part 7. The Dictator in Rome, Reform, Power, and the Ides of March 45 BCE, 244 BCE, when Caesar returned to Rome after the final battle at Munda. He did so not merely as a victorious general, but as the most powerful man in the Roman world. The Senate, now effectively subservient to him, named him Dictator Perpetu, in perpetuition, early 44 BCE. This was unprecedented. Dictatorship in Rome had always been a temporary measure, a tool in times of crisis. But with Caesar, it became something else entirely, a permanent consolidation of supreme authority. His first months back in Rome were filled with pageantry and triumph. Caesar was showered with honors, both by the Senate and by the people. His image was struck on coins, something never before done for a living Roman. Statues of him were placed among those of the gods. He wore the purple and gold of kings, and though he refused the title of Rex, the symbolism was unmistakable. He sat on a golden throne in the Senate, bore a laurel crown at all times, and was given the right to speak first in the chamber. To many, it seemed as though monarchies so long banished from Rome since the expulsion of the Tarquins nearly 5 centuries before had returned under a new name. But Caesar was not merely interested in glory or symbolism. He had grand visions for the transformation of Rome. The Republic, as it had been, was no longer viable. The Senate had been exposed as ineffectual and fractured, prone to infighting and easily swayed by personal ambition. Caesar sought to replace it with a more centralized, more efficient structure, one that he would lead. His reforms came quickly and touched nearly every aspect of Roman life. He restructured the calendar, creating what we now call the Julian calendar. He ordered a census of the empire and reformed the grain dole, reducing corruption and abuse. He settled thousands of veterans and poor citizens in new colonies across the empire, helping to ease overpopulation and unemployment in the city. He expanded the Senate by adding more magistrates and provincial elites, a move designed both to increase efficiency and to dilute the old aristocratic power base. He also took on the issue of debt, a crisis that had long plagued Rome, by mandating that property be accepted as repayment and capping interest. Caesar alleviated much of the economic pressure on common Romans. Meanwhile, public works flourished. Temples, basilicas, new forums, and massive building projects were initiated, both to glorify Rome and to provide employment. Yet not everyone welcomed Caesar's sweeping changes. His centralization of power alarmed the old guard, those who clung to the traditions of the Republic, who feared the loss of their influence. Even some of Caesar's former allies grew uneasy. The idea of a permanent dictator, a single man, controlling every aspect of the state, was antithetical to Roman identity. This unease reached a boiling point when Caesar appeared to entertain the idea of monarchy. In February 44 BCE, at the festival of Lupercalia, Mark Antony offered Caesar a diadema royal crown. Caesar, in front of the assembled masses, pushed it away. Some cheered, believing he had refused the crown out of republican virtue. Others suspected it was a calculated move, a test of public reaction. Behind closed doors, a conspiracy began to form. Senators, many of them formally pardoned by Caesar, and even those he had elevated, began plotting his assassination. Among them were men like Gaius, Cassius, Longinus, and Marcus Junius Brutus, the latter of whom had once been one of Caesar's most trusted protégés. These conspirators saw themselves not as murderers, but as saviors of the Republic. They believed that by killing Caesar, they would restore liberty to Rome. Caesar, for all his political genius, either underestimated the danger or chose to ignore it. Warnings came to him in the final days of his life, omens, dreams, and direct messages from allies. The soothsayer, Spirina, famously told him to beware. The Ides of March. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, his wife Calpurnia begged him not to attend the Senate session at the theatre of Pompey. She had dreamt of his death and saw it as a terrible omen. But Caesar, ever dismissive of superstition, replied that death, when it must come, would come. As he entered the Senate chamber, the conspirators closed in. They surrounded him under the guise of petitioning for political favors. Then, with daggers drawn from their togas, they struck. The first blow came from Casca, then the others followed in a frenzy. Caesar fought back briefly, but when he saw Brutus among the attackers, he is said to have uttered, "Et Brute," words that have echoed through history, whether fact or legend. He fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, blood pooling beneath him, his body pierced by 23 wounds. Rome was plunged into chaos. The conspirators had expected to be hailed as heroes. Instead, they were met with silence, fear, and confusion. The Republic had not been restored. It had been shattered. The people mourned Caesar deeply, and Mark Antony, seizing the moment, used his funeral oration to inflame the public. Holding up Caesar's blood-stained cloak, he spoke of betrayal and tyranny, of murder and lost greatness. Caesar's assassination marked the end of the Roman Republic in spirit, if not in name. His death did not restore the Senate's power, but set the stage for further civil war. Out of the ashes of his murder would rise a new order led by his adopted heir, Gaius Octavius, the future Augustus. And so the man who had once wept at the statue of Alexander, who had conquered Gaul, defied the Senate, and reformed the Roman state, met his end not on the battlefield, but at the hands of his peers. Julius Caesar's life ended in betrayal, but his legacy would shape the world for centuries to come.